Good evening. I met the wonderful Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish in Paris, where we were both living, and that was when I was in my early 20s. Of course, that was very recently. But I wrote this first poem I'm going to read is dedicated to him. I wrote it after his death in 2008. Une fois Paris. At the door you greet me, un vin de verre rouge. I look for the shadows that might have followed us. Look for the wall behind us, in front of us. We sit, aranjuez between us. It's midnight or it's late. It's morning or it's day. Silence has torn our voices. Paris is cold. The dark begins early, Place des États-Unis. Trees losing leaves, a bird with wings growing in your hands, a desire. The echo of a gunshot, a river, the bullet that crossed Cervantes, you say. I remember, I respond. We left his book in yesterday's dream. Can we go back, or has the prison come to us? Who are we if the earth is trapped in an unsigned painting? Where are your eyes, palm, breath, passion? Only Paris allows us to believe in our metaphors. We envy those who walk past by us so easily. They sleep in their beds as we look for ours. Home is farther than us. Orange blossoms, olive, and coffee. I fall to catch you. You help me to your fall, one cigarette at a time. You say, they always find us, one village at a time. They say, it's in our house now, but it's our room, even if you don't deserve one. You say, listen to Beethoven. And I follow your eyes to understand your shadow in the crowd, a homeland, an absent mother. Did they forget we can love? Ave Maria is playing. You give me a poem about a girl you loved. The window fills with evening, with wound, wound filled with echo, echo filled with cry. I move closer to you. I wish I could sleep in the place that sleeps deep in your soul. Wish I held your mother's hand, my father's hand. I wish I saw Carmel from your eyes, the girl you kissed 60 winters, summers, raindrops piling in our prayers, in the footsteps we are forbidden to have. The birds are coming today, you tell me. The land is smaller than the land, smaller, still smaller than our movements. I call your name and you answer. Death, you have beaten death at its game. The freedom that took you takes you, and I find the colors of our faded map. You never say farewell, never cross, just cross. We meet death so it doesn't meet us. We close the door, think of the groves, the verses we will write, the letter we will not send. Insha'Allah, you say, à bientôt. Insha'Allah, I say, yes, the land speaks Arabic. This following poem is about all the languages and countries that are part of me, but never forgetting where I'm from. Blue hours. In the blue hour, the negrita cries, I hide, not to deceive the darkness or myself. La negrita is not far from where I stand, her eyebrows, her one hand. I too am visible now, behind the tree, behind the night, behind the cry, and all I want to know is her name and ask her. Have you ever heard your heart undressing? Seen a stray dog at midnight and realized he understands this hour better than you will understand any hour? Have you ever seen yourself in every woman with your eyes, or in women with eyes more difficult than yours? Have you ever really heard your voice echoing? She offers me tea. We end up drinking coffee, trying to reach the bottom of the cup unafraid. Now, my teeth are stained, my English failing me, my Arabic starting to make sense. We are in a finca now. Perhaps we are safe. Perhaps we desire nothing else. But I can't stop bowing in prayer 5 times a day. My country comes to me, tells me, compatriota, I will always find you, no matter what language you're speaking. And I always have to end with, first of all, I'd like to say, well, lastly perhaps, thank you so much, all you brave souls, for coming through the storm to hear us read tonight. And I always end with this poem even, in hopes of peace. Even. Nothing is even. Even this line I'm writing. Even this line I'm waiting in. Waiting for permission to enter the country, the house, the room. Nothing is even. Even now that laws have been drawn and peace is discussed on high tables, and even if all was said to be even, I would not believe, for even I know that nothing is even. Not the trees, the flowers, not the mountains or the shadow. Our nature is not even. So why even try to get even? Instead, let us find an even better place and call it even. Thank you.
Man græmmes. Jeg skider en rose med tårne, min røv bløder af dårskab og hævn. Jeg er en skide antisemit. Jeg fik det ind med fadermælken, med dronerne over oliventræerne, med stjerner og striber og hvid fosfor. Jeg fik det ind med grædmuren, med ynksiden holocaust, med palæstinensernes ynk, og jeg ynker med dem. Skuffelsen. For foden af bjerget fandt jeg barndommens krop, lemlæstet i mudderet. Jeg slæbte den efter mig som en bror. Jeg søgte det fordærvede skin for kærtegn. Jeg fandt morens kys, og jeg fandt farens, men kinden til kys var kinden til slag. Jeg ønskede at tjene jer, men jeg slog hånden af mig selv. Jeg fyldte min mave med svin og kom udelukkende hjem for at skide. Natten bød mig intet, og mit døgn var drænet for dage. Med den levende hånd berøvede jeg årenes kontinuitet. Jeg tappede mit lem for værdighed. Jeg befamlede endnu en kvindekrop, så ihærdigt som min forlegenhed forgreb sig på min forkrøblede fremtid. Og da jeg ikke kunne bide mine fingernegle længere ned, måtte jeg tage foden i munden. Jeg løb med deres ære, for hvis broren er vantro, er søsterens mødom uredelig. Hvis moren er tildækket af farens skavanker usynlige. Han flyttede stenen, men han brækkede benet. Han tog sin mors død med sin brors. Han lavede 5 børn med bitre hjerter og fandt et nyt tørklæde og lavede 3 mere. Jeg løb med deres ære, og da forvandlingen skete, bed de fingrene af hinanden. De fandt frem, hvad de havde bag sig og konfronterede dem foran sig. På randen af gråd var de, og brønden var dyb, og drømmen var størknet, så ingen ville holde deres tårer tilbage. En mund manglede, og kompensationen var et røvhul. Så hvordan vil du made din sult? Februar, uforudsigelighed. Stilhed er stilhed, og det vokser vildt. Dit helvede er mit. Så simpelt er det, når jeg erobrer det med håb i fingerspidserne. Dine øjne er en illusion, så min paranoia griner i natten. Jeg er det svævende, det bevidstløse, kønsløs i nøgen luft. Jeg slår koldbøtter i tankerne. I februar havde jeg en drøm, så pas på, hvor du sætter din kys. De kunne sætte sig fast. Du siger et eller andet, og så siger jeg et eller andet, men jeg kan ikke bare slå det op for at slå det hen. Tænde en ny cigaret og se en anden solopgang. Det må være dig, så jeg skræller asken af cigaretten og tømmer papvinen for poesi. Jeg siger græd din glans, men vær påpasselig. Jeg er en ven, og jeg vil højst sandsynligt røvrende dig. Men inden vi ser sprækker i evigheden, skal vi spise af træet og forråde Allah. Vi skal debutere og sniffe coke og synge med på et vers af hovmod. Vi skal. De slagter utopier uafhængigt af drømmerne. Manden i sort hælder hjerteblod i kloakken. Sommeren er skæbner og fængsler. Og jeg er kujonen, der sikkert drømmer sig hen i din favn af fremtid, men uden held. Min paranoia griner videre, så jeg griner med. De siger, vågn op og luk til kussen. Men jeg sætter ild til ordene, jeg ser væk, de lider, men det er ikke min kamp. Mit kød er fremmedgjort, fortoget er ikke mit. Jeg smiler i solskin og stemning, og jeg vil gerne tale, men ikke om det. Noter, at jeg er bange, at jeg suger på endnu en cigaret. Hold dig fra dette mørke. Alle, der elsker dig, vil råde dig således. Alle vil knæppe dig. Snart ligger du død i en grøft, kvalt i din egen poesi. Din bøssekrøller kan ikke redde dig, men det er for tidligt at blive sentimental. For tidligt at ryge en joint og være sådan en, der går omvejen uden at have et ærne med Allah. Jeg vinker farvel som et lille barn. 1, 2, 3 midt i al forgængeligheden. Jeg måtte vige ved vandet. Natten som natten, kvinden som kvinden, natten som natten. Hægt mig på dit haleben og slæb mig i bølgen som svandt i sandet. Hvad vil du med den porøse hånd, der krakelerer af et kærtegn, og munden som søger en mund? En orm er født ved lidt under min skulder, mellem mine ribben ved min ryggrad. Den maver sig vej til min mave. Jeg bærer troen som tvivlen, tvivlende på troen og troende på tvivlen. Vi er for mange til frelsen. Du korsfæster dit fodfæste i den forheksede ekstase. Hvad dølger du nu? Jeg ryster dig ud af dig selv. Jeg planter min hunger i din appetit i den offentlighed. Fra lyskryds til lyskryds med lungernes sygdom og køretøjernes trafik med menneskenes dårskab i. Du farer vild i din cyklus. Du er en evigt ivrig edderkop. Jeg brænder dit spind med en flamme fra hvert århundrede. Jeg fodrer hunden fra min egen. Jeg intervenerer i dit slikhus. Rækker en hånd som en fremmed og slider i iscenesættelsen. Jeg gemmer mig hos en jøde.
In the following excerpt, I shall share with you a glimpse of my journey through painting. The original text appeared in my book titled Palestinian Art from 1850 to the present. Thanks to Lorna Kuhlman for taking the time to choose the passages from the original text that the reading may fit in the time slot I was given for this evening. Visual expression is a language that is separate from that of verbal expression. One cannot give voice to the other, nor can one be a substitute for the other. Painting proceeds from painting just as much as writing proceeds from reading. For me, words have always come after painting. It is never the reverse. But since images flow from one's imagination, the unfolding of which is bound to memory, both painting and writing are twin products of the same memory. It is the completed images, however, that reawaken my conscious memory. Otherwise, why would a painting's title, the only link between words and visual form, come to mind long after I put the finishing touches to a painting? At best, the title is a bridge that allows the viewer to negotiate an entry into the language of a painted image. It attempts no more than to sum up or evoke certain associations with memory, be they personal or collective. As a child, the first contact I ever had with painted images came from Byzantine icons. A number of them were placed high up in a niche of the Jerusalem home in which I was born. One of them, probably belonging to the Jerusalem School of Icon Painting, had an Arabic inscription on it. Years later, I was able to decipher the name of a paternal ancestor as the man who had commissioned the icon. Icons seemed to provide my parents with a strength I did not understand. For them, an icon was a window through which they could gain entry into their own interior worlds. As for me, I was told that the icon's niche was the place where the angels left their gifts during the night preceding a church feast day. As long as I could last, I would wait through the night to see the angel, but all I could make out in the dark was the light of the lantern flickering before the icon's reticent colors. As for the images the icons represented, they always struck me with a mysterious awe which left me speechless. Only now do I realize why I was told that an iconographer does not paint an icon, he writes it. According to legend, as Christ was bearing his cross to Calvary, a woman called Veronica came forward from the crowd and took off her veil to wipe the sweat from the face of the man from Galilee. It is believed that the image of his features was miraculously imprinted on the material later referred to as the sudarium. In none of the Gospels is there any mention of such an incident, or of the woman who often appears in European paintings wearing a turban, in allusion to her Eastern origins. And yet, at the end of the 19th century, Rome dedicated a chapel to Veronica, whose name, Vera Icon, means true image, on the Via Dolorosa in Jerusalem. The chapel replaced the original idea, which had been to establish a missionary school in my city of birth, to teach the city's Arab natives the fine art of European painting. Had the school been established, it would have been the first institution ever to teach the European painting tradition to the Arabs of Jerusalem. But then, would my father have sent me there instead of sending me as an apprentice to the workshop of Khalil Halabi, one of the last icon painters in the Old City? From our roof, amidst our neighbors' houses in the Old City, we could also see a walled and rectangular place that must have once served as a water reservoir. We used to call it Birkat al-Khan, the pool of the inn. I do not know why, but I always thought that this open space must have been the site referred to in the Gospel of St. John as Bethesda's pool. According to legend, the waters of Bethesda's pool had miraculous healing powers. People believed that an angel occasionally came down to stir its waters, and that the first person to dip in it was healed. For decades, it was told, a paralytic man had never succeeded in being first because he had no one to assist him. When Christ saw the man lying there, he commanded him to stand up, carry his bed, and walk. The miracle, believed to have taken place, led to Christ's condemnation by the city's Jews for having ordered the lame to take up his bed on a Sabbath. The place I used to believe was Bethesda's pool was no more than a dry basin for most of the year. Our time, I was soon to realize, was not one of miracles. Refugee families from the 1948 war had swamped the houses surrounding the site. Today, it seems that the Pool's basin has expanded beyond Palestine's borders to reach wherever the country's disinherited continue to live. All around, one sees the multitudes who have been maimed by the wars. Who can tell whom not to wait for a miracle anymore? Thank you.
And I'll read from my novel Come, a few chapters. I read from the beginning, so I don't think it's necessary that I say anything. I'll just try to read slowly so you can follow. The snow is falling heavily, and she has already vanished from sight. He stands in the doorway, contemplating her footprints, 3 steps down, across the street, to the left and away. Snowflakes drift in. They hit his shirt and the shelves behind him, but he doesn't budge. The air has a faint smell of moist soil, even if it can't be possible. The narrow cobble street is enveloped by the tarmac density of the old city center. It has snowed all day, and the snow reaches well beyond the curb, which can be discerned only in the one driveway that has been cleared. In front of his shoes, the carpet is wet through, and a small bank of snow is stealing up the wall to the right. Still, he is hesitating. She wore boots with thick rubber soles. He can make out the rhombus grooves in the nearest footprints. Soundlessly, the snowflakes pour into the prints. His glasses mist up, and his hand on the doorknob is turning white with cold. He pulls the door towards him, but just before it closes, he pushes it open again. Across the street, the footprints are less distinct, as if she was no longer able to lift her boots free of the surface, or as if she dragged one leg behind. A shallow furrow leads from one step to the next. The building is quiet. Everyone else has gone home hours ago. He slowly shuts the door, turns the key and returns to his office, sits down at the desk. He pulls a thick manuscript closer. It's damp. The first couple of pages stick together, and top left it's so moist that the smothered text can be read through the cover page. The corners curl upwards, and there's a smear of red wine below the title, but he isn't sure whether it was always there. He takes off his glasses, hides his face in his hands, closes his eyes. She hadn't needed bring it back. Nowadays one can just print another copy. For several minutes he sits without stirring. Then abruptly he straightens himself up and bangs his fist down onto the manuscript. Who the hell does she think she is? It's your choice, she had said before she got up and left. Of course it's his choice. Who else's would it be? He looks at the manuscript, abruptly jumps up and strides over to the coat rack, pulls his jacket off the hanger and on. The blueprint has just been cleared. Production must send it to the printers tomorrow for the book to be launched on May 6 as planned. He shudders slightly. The shirt is cold and damp where the jacket presses it against his skin. It has been written by a young man, one of the best-selling authors in the country, his 5th novel. Marketing has been busy for months. He goes to the window, pushes the curtain aside. The snow keeps streaming down, veiling the outside world in a quivering whiteness. It's the author's best novel by far. About subject matters never before touched upon, with an insight he's never before revealed. It'll sell in the 100,000. He returns to his desk and sits down. Worldwide, perhaps millions. It's my story, she had said. He'd given her the manuscript only because she'd lived there, in Morensau, during the peace process. Thought she would be interested. It was already 5 p.m. when she entered his office. She placed the soaked pile of papers on his desk. It's my story, she said. First he hadn't responded. They just sat looking at each other. He ought never have given it to her. It wasn't only because she had lived there that he had done so. It didn't matter. There were too many of those kinds of problems. You can't own a story, he said at last. Aren't any stories so personal that no one else ought publicize them? Her eyes are transparent. Odd that he's never before noticed. You can't have experienced this. He said it kindly, not as a question, but as something she could concur with and thereby end the discussion, or as something she could contradict by offering a series of details he knew wouldn't correspond with reality, except within her own mind. It was always like that. One can see right into her, he thought. She didn't reply, just kept peering into his eyes. It infuriated him. He didn't know why. All he saw was her seeing him. He picks up the phone and calls home. I'll be late, he explains. Not again, says his wife. Don't wait for me. I'll pick you up on the way. No, I don't want you to drive into the city in this weather. It isn't safe. He speaks sincerely and he savors the sincerity in his own voice. I'll take a cab. The kitchen staff always leave a few lunch leftovers in the directorate fridge. His wife mentions something about the Minister for Social Affairs and a proposal for integration of immigrants that undermines the proposal she herself has just put forward. He gets up and walks over to the window, gazes out. He doesn't listen. The snowflakes flutter ceaselessly through the darkness and the skewed light figurines drawn up by the street lamps and the window opposite. It's his world, but suddenly it's as if it's not. He has a lecture to prepare. Does the universe hold different rules for different people? If something is read somewhere, it wasn't what she said. I'll be there in time, he says. When he's hung up, he goes to the kitchen and opens the fridge, but the fridge is empty. It doesn't matter, he isn't hungry. Before he called his wife, he had read the first 3 chapters. It's fiction, fascinating. No one experiences this kind of thing. The book begins with the pummeling to death of an elections observer, with the blood melding with the dust on the African linoleum. A young woman is the aide of the head of the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Morensau. The pages are damp and the text smudged, but the words are still readable. She stares at the desiccating blood without knowing that her life is about to become another. This is when he called his wife, 5:35. People often think they've experienced something they haven't. She didn't answer when he asked her, did someone hurt you in Morensau? It's a kind of story only written in novels. She merely gazed at him, made him feel like a fool, even though she had said nothing, nor had any expression in her eyes that could explain the feeling he got when looking into them. Fool. As if it was solely his own fault that her gaze made him feel like a fool. It's what is said to follow further into the novel that made him ask her. He flicks through the pages, attempting to locate the scene, gets annoyed with the dampness which glues the pages together. She wouldn't think him a fool, or would she? Hurt. Maybe it was the word. You don't speak about hurt when talking about war and rape in Africa. But it wasn't her. Where is it? In the middle of the novel, further back? Yes, she lived there, he knows, everyone does. What was her job? She never speaks about it. Or she does, but in these oddly detached phrases. Those 2 years she had lived in Morensau, that's all. Those eyes as from far off, as 2 years taken out of her life. Then this peculiar undertone, what is it? Yeah, of joy, not dread. He skims through the middle chapters, but still doesn't find what he's looking for. A country I've seen go from war to peace, he overheard her say a few years back. That's exactly it. No horror. Now he remembers. It was at the dinner for the Albert Prize. We've all got to do our part. That's what she said, and smiled, eyes far away, as if it was her doing. That's what is so ridiculous. He gives up searching for the scene and instead puts the 2 heaps of paper back into one. He tears a blue note off the pad and sticks it onto the cover page, as if she had personally saved Morensau. He has a speech to write and places the manuscript in the outbox, the note reading, to the printers. Thank you.
مثل هذه الأشجار. الأشجار حريصة أن تتمايل دون أن تسقط، لأن الأشجار الساقطة ها هنا لا تتلقاها الأرض، لا شيء ولا أحد، ولأنها أشجار لم تعد تحتمل عفن الجذور، لأنها اختارت أن تنبت في الريح، عليها أن تدفع الثمن وأن تسقط بلا نهاية. وعليه أرجوك وأنت تتمايل على الأرصفة أن لا تسقط، لأنك أيضا ستسقط بلا نهاية. لا بأس، لا بأس إن تخيلت أشجارا تتمايل معك وهواء يتلقى سقوطك. أنت الذي عشت مثل هذه الأشجار بلا أرض ولا جذور. قدس، عندما أغادرك أتحجر، وعندما أعود إليك أتحجر. أسميك ميدوزا، أسميك الأخت الكبرى لسدومة وعمورة، أيتها الجرن الصغير الذي أحرق روما. القتلى يزجلون على التلال، والعصاة عاتبون على رواة قصتهم، وأنا أترك البحر ورائي وأعود إليك، أعود بهذا النهر الصغير الذي يصب في يأسك. أسمع المقرئين والمكفنين وغبار المعزين. لم أبلغ 30 ودفنتني مرات كثيرة، وفي كل مرة كنت أخرج من التراب لأجلك. فليذهب إلى الجحيم مبجلوك، فليذهب إلى الجحيم مبجلوك، بائعو تذكارات ألمك، كل الذين يقفون معي الآن في الصورة. أسميك ميدوزا، أسميك الأخت الكبرى لسدوم وعمورة، أيتها الجرن الصغير الذي ما زال يحترق. عندما أغادرك أتحجر، وعندما أعود إليك أتحجر. بطاقة هوية. رغم أن الكردي مشهور بقساوة الرأس كما يتندر الأصدقاء، إلا أنني كنت أرق من نسمة الصيف وأنا أحتضن إخوتي في 4 جهات الأرض، وكنت الأرمني الذي لم يصدق الدموع تحت أجفان ثلج التاريخ وهي تغطي المقتولين والقتلة. أكثير بعدما حصل أن أسقط مخطوطة شعري في الوحل. وفي جميع الأحوال كنت سوريا من بيت لحم أرفع مخطوطة أخي الأرمني، وتركيا من قونيا يدخل الآن من باب دمشق. وقبل قليل وصلت بيادر وادي السير، واستقبلني النسيم الذي وحده يعرف معنى أن يأتي المرء من جبال القفقاس مصحوبا بكرامته وعظام أهله. وحين وطئ قلبي تراب الجزائر لأول مرة لم أشك للحظة أني لست أمازيغيا. في كل مكان ذهبت إليه ظنوني عراقيا، وكان ظنهم في مكانه. وطالما حسبت نفسي مصريا عاش ومات مرارا بجانب النيل مع أسلافه الأفارقة. وقبل كل شيء كنت أراميا، ولا غرو أن أخوالي على الأقل من بيزنطة، وأنني كنت الصبي الحجازي الذي نال حلوى الدلال من صفرونيوس وعمر في فتح بيت المقدس. ليس من مكان قاوم غزاته إلا وكنت من أهله، وما من إنسان حر لا تجمعني به قرابة، وما من شجرة أو غيمة ليس لها أفضال عليه. كما أن ازدرائي للصهاينة لن يمنعني من القول إنني كنت يهوديا طرد من الأندلس، وإنني ما زلت أنسج المعنى من ضوء ذلك الغروب. في بيتي نافذة مفتوحة على اليونان، وأيقونة تشير إلى روسيا، ورائحة طيب أبدي تهب من الحجاز، ومرآة ما إن أقف أمامها إلا وأراني أتدبر الربيع في حدائق شيراز وأصفهان وبخارى. وبأقل من هذا لا يكون المرء عربيا. أوبرا إلى كمال بولاطة. لو كنت موسيقيا من أولئك الذين يصنعون أوبرات إيطالية ضخمة حيث النوتات مثل قباقيب تهوي على مشاعر المتوسطيين من أمثالنا بالذات، لصنعت واحدة وأهديتها لك، لكن وأسفي لا أملك سوى هذه الكلمات النشاز. وأسفي. شكرا.
You said in one of the other poems, which you didn't unfortunately read tonight, that exile has its ways. What do you mean by that?
It's a little bit what Najwan said and what I said earlier, is that exile affects us in really just unexpected ways. There are times where we think we understand it, and then something happens and it completely throws us a curve and we are lost. And I think in the experience of exile, at least in my case, and probably, you can't arrive. And that feeling of not being able to arrive is just so disconcerting as a feeling.
You were talking about that yesterday, I think, Kamal? Yes. Hello. You were talking about also being in exile and this having to deal with, having to survive in exile. And you have also, like Nathalie, lived a lot of places. How have you been dealing with it? And actually now you're living in Berlin since, 2 weeks or something like that?
No, since 2 days.
2 days? Oh, yes.
Since 2 days, I moved to Berlin from Menton, which is in the south of France, where I went for a couple of months to finish a series of paintings, and I ended up there for 15 years. Last year, I spent a year at the Wissenschaftskolleg in Berlin, and I was very inspired by the whole city, so I decided to move there. I don't think my kind of exile is like that of Nathalie. I lived 25 years of my life in America, and I have never had the American accent that Nathalie has. And I think that tells a lot as to what exile means. Because I have continued to speak in Arabic, I have continued to write in Arabic, I have also been writing in English. And the work that I'm doing, whether it was in painting or in writing, is only a way that helps me to take the stress or the experience of exile, where in my work I find home wherever I go.
Is that the same experience you have? That your home is your work, is your art, is your writing?
Sure. I mean, to follow up with what Kamal said, our experiences are so distinct. Most Palestinians have such distinct experiences. And Kamal was fortunate to spend his up until 25 years in Jerusalem. I didn't have that 25.
I left when I was 17.
Right, I was 17. I unfortunately didn't have that, but along with not having that, I also lost language. And by that I mean, even English is not my first language. I grew up with, I don't even consider I have a mother tongue, because at home we spoke 4 different languages. And so even from language, I was uprooted. And Americans, as American as I sound, consider me to have an accent. So, you're constantly experiencing otherness according to where you're at, And, but I do feel like, Kamal, the idea that I have found a certain type of homeland in my work, but I still am in Palestine every year, okay? And I don't know how this relationship, how this experience has affected me in relationship to exile. So it's sort of a sense where the feeling to me is, and perhaps this is poetic image, that I'm still there all the time, and yet I'm not. That's how I experience this internally.
Did you ever write a poem which had nothing to do at all with your history, with your background?
Well, I did write a book called Love and Strange Horses, which was the 3 movements of the heart. I thought perhaps love might be a little less turbulent ground. I realized it was even more. But even there, it's what I said earlier with exile. Even there, what's political and yes, we have political identities, but how do we define politics? Because even love can be political.
Janne, what do you think when you listen to our guests?
Well, first of all, I think how privileged I am.
Yeah.
I have a choice. I have chosen to become an international nomad, but I can come back to the country where I was born anytime I want. When I left my apartment, I sold it. It was not somebody else just taking it from me. I do recognize the sense of being uprooted, having a cultural mixed background. My mother's Austrian and my father half German. And I recognize growing up feeling different than the other kids. It was before immigration was so usual in Denmark. And yet not belonging. I recognize the thing of language, because we didn't speak German at home, because my parents wanted us to be Danish. So as a kid, I couldn't really communicate properly with the Austrian part of the family, my grandmother. And I learned German much later, but as a grown-up I realized I always felt like an 8-year-old asking for chocolate when I spoke German. Now that has slowly changed in the last few years, but so I do know the sense of not belonging. And since I was 23, I most of the time lived outside of Denmark, mainly in Africa and in New York and various European countries. And I also recognize, therefore, feeling at home in my work. And I'm at home on the road also. What I tried to do was at some point, because I was always looking for a home, a place where I would feel at home, and at some point I realized I won't find it, but I can make a home and make that feeling of estrangement also my home. But again, I wish to underline the privilege of choice.
Do you feel any political or moral obligation in your writing?
Yes, it's almost like I can't help it. And you can say you don't know where it comes from when we again grow up under such privileged conditions as we do in Denmark. But actually it just makes me so much more aware of the obligation to get involved. Like for example, right now I'm involved in working on something with other writers against the surveillance in America. Yeah, and I'm very aware that because various friends of mine, writers from other countries who have written about this, they suddenly can't get entry into the US, and New York is my home, and yet I feel if people who have a country to go home to don't speak out against this, who should? So these kind of things I feel obliged. And maybe also, having grown up with this awareness always that the Red Cross saved my mother, in a sense, after the Second World War. They went around to the schools and simply took the skinniest children and sent them to either Switzerland or Denmark or Sweden to get food. And my mother was 3 months in Denmark. Actually, Denmark had taken 20,000 kids after the First World War, and they took 3,000 after the Second World War. And I always feel that's such an extraordinary measure that was the Denmark that once was, that you take in the kids of your enemy and feed them. I mean, that is not the Denmark, unfortunately, we have known the last 10, 15 years, but I think it's the one we should fight for.
Najwan? What do you think poetry is able of? What can you reach, or whom can you reach with poetry, whom you cannot reach by activism or journalism, because you're also an activist?
You could reach yourself with poetry. This is the medium which is, in my opinion, best to reach your own self. Yeah. And by reaching your own self, you would find out that you are reaching others, because others are part of your own self.
And that's, if I just must say something, that's why I think it's so fantastic with this, you're coming here and visiting us, is that we get to know this whole conflict, we get to know it from a much more deeper or inner point of view, which I think is very important. What do you experience, or what have you been feeling by meeting each other? Who would like to say? Yeah.
Actually, when you was talking about homeland and country and belonging and all these things, actually, my home, when I meet, being here with Kamal and Yahya and Nathalie, is like being at home. This is something very rare. The last time I saw Kamal was 3 years ago. I guess it was in Paris. And I saw Nathalie last time 2 years ago this year actually, in New York. And I'm just meeting Yahya now. So this is for me being at home, because in Palestine, those 3 of them are not allowed to come and back and live in their country. So being with them is the country for me.
Do you feel isolated?
Yes, not isolated, I'm exiled, because
exiled in Jerusalem.
The fact that you remained in your homeland while the majority of your nation is exiled and prevented from coming back, and exiled by force, by the Israeli occupation. So, of course, I'm living as exiled. Whenever I'm reading literature or theoretical things about exile, I do feel that they do work well with me.
But still, do you have any feeling of similarity with us, with your Danish colleagues? Is it, although you have another experience and you have other conditions, is there still something in common ground?
Actually, nationalities are labels. Take the labels, we are very similar. So these are just labels, and these are just slogans and titles. Just take them and you would find out that we are very similar, and we have so the self and the other are also illusions. So personally, I always feel that I'm the other. Of course, there is those cultural things. Cultures are different. The way of expressing intimacy is different. For example, they would say that, Scandinavians are cold. This is not true. Comparing to Latin Americans, for example, or Middle Easterns, which we are very much good in expressing feelings, but intimacy, the difference is in the way of expressing the intimacy. I think Scandinavians are very intimate, but in their own way.
Now you read actually some of your colleagues, Danish colleagues' texts. what do you think of them? Not if they're good or bad or anything, but what is your experience with these texts? Are they very much different than the texts from Palestinian writers?
As text, you mean?
Yeah, as text, yeah.
In poetry, there is a difference. For example, I like the work of Martin, who's not with us, unfortunately,
Martin
because of the storm. But for example, the work of Yahya, even both are writing in Danish.
Yeah.
I could see the difference. It has to do with the whole history and whole context and whole experience. So we are different in literature, in what we are writing. And this is the beauty of literature, because imagine if we would write texts with the same taste.
Yeah.
This would be the hell.
Yeah. Do you get inspired by us?
Yeah, and although they're different because we're dealing with different cultural and linguistics differences, but actually it's still always about the human condition. And I think ultimately when we're reading, that's the beauty of literature, or I like to believe art, that we transcend so much of those borders and boundaries that we create, or the political structure create for us. And I was speaking to a journalist before in saying that, we focus so much on difference all the time, and we don't look enough on commonalities. And once we start becoming aware of the other, that's the commonalities surface, and ultimately we just realize, like Najwan said, the labels are gone, and just the human experience is what comes. We were together all day, and I felt like I had known her for a long time. And when I was speaking with you yesterday, we were strolling the streets. It didn't feel like the first time. It didn't feel like the first time we were strolling those streets.
Yeah. Do you want to say something about it?
Well, just to add that for me also I feel the same way. I think what is always part of the respect for other human beings is you have to recognize that you don't have the same experience, and people who have grown up under much tougher conditions, have an expanded experience in some ways, but we all have our traumas, and we all go through different things, and in that, again, in this humanity we recognize each other. And art is about universal humanity, I think, when it's good, and so that's what we are all seeking, and that's why, we had also this great discussion Friday about the work of everyone, and I think we do recognize each other with the limitations of not having the same experience, of course.
Yeah, sure. I know it's kind of a banal question, but I will pose it anyway. Do you think literature can change the world? I mean, is it possible to do something important with words? Who will say something about that? Yes. Yeah.
Literature already changed the world. Already. Without literature, imagine the world just without literature.
That's right.
Where we would be now.
Yeah. I would like to share with you, Yahya, I won't ask you anything, just relax. But actually, I think it's very interesting that your Palestinian colleagues, they think that they can recognize the tone of your poetry. Try to tell, because for us it's so brand new. So could you please tell a little about that? Maybe you could, because I think you were the first who said something about it.
I don't understand a word of Danish, but when I heard Yahya read his poetry, I felt the surface of the poetry, which communicates directly to the Danes, communicated deeply within me, because I felt that his voice came from my part of the world, from where I was raised. The delivery, of his words had something very deep down that is very connected with our culture. I did mention, I forgot when, I think yesterday or before yesterday, how in Arabic the word poem, called qasida, which in Spain they also use it, is rooted in the verb qasada, meaning to aim. And the word sha'r, which means poetry, comes from the root of the verb to feel. So the writing of a poem in Arabic is a combination of how you go deep within you to aim out at something. And interestingly, qasida is a feminine word, and sha'r, meaning feeling, is a masculine word. So in a way, the meeting of the two words actually represent what Arabic poetry is all about. And despite the wall that I sensed between the poetry of Yahya and myself, I could feel the river and where the source of that river is.
It's very beautiful, actually. It's a very beautiful way of defining poetry.
Yeah, I was actually thinking of the need to have Yahya's poetry translated into Arabic.
Yeah.
And I've spoken with Najwan about that possibility, and to see how I could encourage Najwan to exercise his past profession of a journalist, because there is something very important in the voice of Yahya to be transmitted in the Arab world.
How do you think it would be perceived in the Arab world? Because here we have had some fuss.
I think it will be received with open arms.
With open arms.
And this is extremely important for the poetry of Yahya to develop. There is no way for it to develop here. We know that he is even physically threatened to live in this country where he was raised. And he has to, at some point, but it is his decision, to go back to the roots of where he comes from and see the connection that he is not uprooted as he may be feeling in this society.
Very good. Najwan, you wanted to comment?
I totally agree with Kamal, and he really drew my attention to what I was personally feeling when I first saw Yahya reading. I was looking at him and saying, oh my God, I would be him if I was writing in Danish. I would do the same things. So as a voice, as inner voice, I think he has a Palestinian Arab voice. And of course, he's also Danish by using the Danish language or by belonging to the Danish language. So he has both within him. Of course, like most poets, they do misunderstood by their society. This is very common among poets internationally. There isn't a good poet who wasn't damning, at least in part of his life.
Yeah.
If you would go now and mention my name to people who knew me 10 years ago or 15 years ago or even now, they would say he's horrible. So this is very common about poets. But here the Danish context is very sensitive for reasons that Yahya has nothing to do with. So the context and the media, somehow they do hijack his voice and his story. He is not the enemy of Islam, he's not ex-Muslim, he's not all those labels. He's just Yahya. So those labels were imposed on him, and I think it's important to understand this. I think he's a wonderful person, and I think he's a good voice for his society, and also for Denmark. I think Denmark should be proud of having such a beautiful voice.
Yahya, you still don't want to say anything?
Shukran.
Means what?
Thank you.
You bitch, or what?
Said thank you.
Okay. Yeah?
Well, what to say? I think my friends have articulated, his voice and what is happening, the attacks and so forth. It reminds me, I moved to New York right after 9/11, and a lot of the Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim poets, especially those that also had a similar, because the voice of Yahya has that Arabic, in context, but also, the African American tradition and sort of the spoken word tradition also echoes in his voice for me. And a lot of, Najwan and I know some of them, but a lot of those poets, Muslim, Arab, were heavily discriminated. And the discrimination happens in different ways. Sometimes it's not overt attacks, but they weren't given a space in which to really publish the work. Now, we do have the internet, where voices are able to sort of transcend those borders that, that exist with publishers. But it was unbelievable to me to have gone to the United States, to live for the first time, really, after 9/11, and realize the backlash that existed, and, among artists. Which is normally a more open field. So integration, and of course Danish society is newer at that, because imagine the United States, it's a country of immigrants. So, but yes, I think the more we publish different voices in a nation, the more plural it is, the more beauty can grow.
And Janne, what do you think about this whole thing about Yahya and the whole reception in Denmark and the whole debate? And is that how we should be as writers, or why is it so sensational in a way?
Well, in a strange way, I find that it's very sad that when someone writes some extraordinary poetry, they can get threatened on their life. He can't walk, quietly in the street at all. And then I think it's up to the rest of us writers to help stand up for him. And I think it's very interesting what Kamal and the others are saying about that it would be received very differently in Palestine. I think it shows how much we are a province here when it comes to foreign cultures. Because I actually think the same would be in America. And I have actually one question for Kamal here. Would Najwan's poetry in the Middle East be seen as a voice of the Arab Spring?
You mean
Yahya's voice be seen as a voice for the Arab Spring?
No, I don't think so at all. Yahya's experience is a very specific experience dealing with Denmark and with a certain accent of Danish, as I understand. I cannot see it being compared neither to what happened in black voices in America or in the Arab world. There is something very specific, and poetry is always about the detail of things. It's the elixir of language, where you bring something to the utmost essentials and you bring it out. in the language that is closest to your lips. This is what Yahya has done. And for me, also, the very name of Yahya, the root of that word is hayat, meaning life. And Yahya has been always the first word that was pronounced in every liberation movement.
Nice.
Where you say, Yahya al-Hurriya, or Yahya al-Watan. And each person lives his name, and Yahya is living his name in Denmark.
That's very
May I
good.
just say something? And then, how I hear it, in a sense, in the midst of these autumn storms, we might be living a Danish spring.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry, but the evening has come to an end. I would like to thank you very much. You have been the most inspiring. Thank you for the importance of your work, for all of you, also the Danes, of course, for the beauty and for the creativity you are bringing, and for opening our minds, and for having been such good company.